Hello and welcome to this week's What Were They Thinking? Everybody knows that smoking is bad for you, and as a consequence, many people have simply given up the use of tobacco altogether. Others have opted to use something called vaping. Unfortunately for these individuals, vaping may not be any safer than tobacco use, with about 100 cases of mysterious illness that is directly associated to vaping occurring as of this week. Most of these have been among teens and young adults, and more of these again have been located within only 14 states in America. This mysterious illness is as yet undiagnosed, but is causing a number of them to end up in hospital, and even then some are going into intensive care, requiring the assistance of ventilators. Symptoms of this mysterious illness include difficulty breathing, shortness of breath, chest pain. There are also reports of fever, cough, vomiting, and diarrhea. The CDC has begun working with local health departments with confirmed cases to determine the cause. Their most likely culprit, vaping, has been identified due to the association with a number of clusters of particularly young adults and teens who only vape. Given the symptoms, you might think that it is an infectious agent. However, although there are similarities in symptoms, there is enough difference and geographical distance between cases that a common pathogen would be very unlikely under the circumstances. This comes on the heels of research that vaping may not be all that helpful by comparison. You then have complications from not only nicotine products, but cannabis products, and even homemade versions. Then, vaping itself has only been a significant factor in any kind of medical condition for 10 years, and it is not well known what the effects of this are. Unfortunately, this has also been compounded by the fact that one of the now nearly 200 cases of the mysterious illness associated with vaping has died. It has increased in less than a week to twice what it was before. The FDA has a dedicated reporting site for this. You'll find a link below should you experience any of the symptoms that have been described and vape. The next piece of interesting news comes from a tiny Polish village called Mieście Oddańskie, which has developed an unusual trend over the last 10 years in that no male babies have been born. There have been a variety of reasons given, but the leading hypothesis at present is that it is simply a statistical anomaly. In the last year, 12 baby girls have been born. This in and of itself may not be that surprising in a large metropolitan center. In a small village, it is far more of an issue, as 12 births may account for the entirety of that year's children. The birth of each girl is essentially a coin flip. There is a 1 in 2 chance that there will be a boy or a girl, and each birth itself is an isolated event, where the preceding birth and the one that follows will have no effect on the current. That means that in all instances, there was simply a 50-50 chance that it would be a boy or it would be a girl. Based on the sample size, there is a possibility of an underlying genetic predisposition within the village itself, or it may just be a very small sample size, which has an inherent bias. For this reason, the village has been repeating some of the advice they've received to encourage having a boy. Things like sleeping with an axe under their bed. Advice that has no benefit or use. It is similar to the advice being given to people to wash their chickens, and one which the United States Department of Agriculture is telling people is a bad idea. There are two main bacteria that will infect your raw chicken, Salmonella and Clostridium. Both of these cause food poisoning and other diseases from the gastrointestinal tract. Generally speaking, you wind up praying to the porcelain god. Washing your chicken will not prevent this. In fact, it may wind up spreading these particular bacteria further around the chicken. Washing will not remove them, but cooking will kill them. Extended periods exposed to the high heat of an oven or fry pan will cause bacteria to be destroyed. The USDA wanted to get a better understanding of just how poorly people have understood this. They did two things. They sent a control group an email with clear instructions on how to prepare a chicken, including not to wash it. The second group were recruited and brought into a university's test kitchen. The test kitchen participants were not given any instructions, and some happened to wash their chickens. The university test kitchen was good for this, as the researchers were able to stain for the bacteria and find just how much the spray had spread and further contaminated other surfaces. This can lead to contamination of other foods, such as salads and cooking utensils. Contamination with these bacteria from raw chicken is what will lead to food poisoning. In another instance of an unexpected hitchhiker getting to where it wasn't meant to be, there's a case study coming out of America in which a Kansas woman found that she had a tiny venomous spider living in her ear. Doctors extracted the dime-sized spider after she presented at hospital when experiencing auditory sounds that shouldn't have been there. Fortunately for her, the brown recluse spider that had decided to make her ear its home had in fact not bitten her at any point yet. This meant that she had not been poisoned, fortunately, and will be able to take appropriate measures to prevent future unintended squatters. The conversation has also tried to answer a question nobody really wanted to ask, and that is, why do humans not engage in cannibalism if it is common in animals? Consider that even some of our closest animal cousins, such as the chimpanzee, will eat their own or related offspring in order to gain access to more protein. This does raise the question as to why behavior is considered taboo among humans. The conversation presents an interesting explanation for this, and uses the example of the 1972 Andes plane crash. That was a situation in which those who had survived the crash waited until near death to finally engage in cannibalism of those passengers who had not survived. They put forward an argument that the human ability to reason and give symbolic representation of the person to the dead body is what prevents us as a species from engaging in cannibalism. That this overrides some of the more basic desires, such as hunger. The taboo is almost universal, with very few and very limited examples of peoples who do engage in cannibalism. Perhaps some of the best known and most well studied are the 4 people of Papua New Guinea, who engage in a form of funerary cannibalism in which the body and deceased are respected by being eaten rather than consumed by bugs. The question is an interesting one, looking at both the growing populations and needs to find a way to promote food production and supply it. The scenario discussed in question is more reminiscent of what you might imagine from the Matrix, but in reality it does have implications for what we eat and where it comes from, and what people are willing to consume. In the future, bugs and insects may be a source of foodstuffs. particularly protein, or there is meat that is grown without an animal. In an extension of that line of reasoning, scientists have found a possible lead as to where eukaryotic life came from when investigating Archaea. Archaea are one of the 3 branches that begin the phylogenetic tree, those branches being prokaryotes, meaning your bacterial cells, your eukaryotes, multicellular organisms, much as humans, plants, insects, and so on, and then your Archaea. These are an interesting bunch of creatures, primarily because they are very different to both eukaryotes and prokaryotes. One example discovered long ago is that of the Asgardia family of Archaea. Some scientists believe that they may be the bridge between prokaryotes and eukaryotes. The hard part about the Asgard family of Archaea is that they are incredibly slow to culture. Division takes about 20 days to occur. By comparison to something like E. coli, it takes only 30 minutes. This is why it took Japanese researchers 12 years to be able to reach a point where they could properly investigate the species and release their preprint publication. They have named this particular species of Archaea Promethea archaeum syntrophicum, named after Prometheus, the ancient Greek god who is said to have created life. The investigation over this more than decade of work found a number of things that are unusual. The first and perhaps foremost important is that this particular archaeum will only grow in the presence of 2 other microbes. These are necessary in order to deal with waste products it generates, and, at least in theory, to provide it with some sort of sustenance. The archaea will release hydrogen as part of its normal process of metabolism. If this is allowed to accrue, it will hinder the growth of the already very slowly dividing and growing archaea. These 2 bacterium help by removing the hydrogen from the surrounding environment. The cell's structure is also incredibly interesting, as it further supports this symbiotic relationship. The archaea has a series of tentacles that extend from it, and these create nests for other microbial organisms to live within. Much like the theory with where mitochondria come from in human cells, there is a theory that eukaryotes may have begun when a archaea decided to consume, or at least somehow mesh with, a prokaryote. This created a hybrid of the 2 that could, at least in theory, be one way that eukaryotes came into existence. As the work is being hosted on a preprint server, it has not yet undergone full peer review, and it will be interesting to see just what the scientific community has to say about this possible explanation as to how things have happened and why they are occurring, and possibly an explanation as to how one arm of the phylogenetic tree came to be. In a similar line of reasoning to how life became, YouTube's AI, in its development and improvement, has learned how to flag robot battles as animal cruelty. YouTube relies heavily on algorithms, and these in turn are based on a form of AI. It analyzes the content of the video and then attributes certain tags to it. These then limit its state, ensure it's only available to certain people, remove it from certain regions entirely, and in this case, theoretically is trying to identify when the terms of service have been breached. This problem was only brought to light when the channel Makers News brought to public knowledge that YouTube was doing it. A YouTube spokesman has then confirmed that these videos did not breach any of the terms of service, and were certainly wrongfully flagged as animal cruelty. Unfortunately, this comes on the heels of a variety of other issues with YouTube's credibility, particularly the recent spate of videos regarding World War II that were taken down, despite being educational documentaries on the history of that event. In positive news, India's Chandrayaan-2 lunar lander has finally entered into orbit around the moon. This means that it should be on schedule to land on the surface on September 7th. This will make India the fourth country to land a spacecraft on the moon. This is both the most important and the most difficult part of the entire process. It is where the parachute lander failed and crashed into the lunar surface. While India is busy trying to land on the moon, the American flat earther Mad Mike is attempting to launch yet another rocket after his last failed attempt to prove that the Earth is indeed flat. His past attempts, and that is plural attempts, have taken him to a height of roughly 572 meters. This has led to him being injured on a number of occasions. For most people, building and launching rockets on a regular basis would both be uneconomical and overly dangerous. Unfortunately for this guy, he's both dedicated to his belief that the Earth is flat and can prove it with rocket travel, but has also been funded by the Infinity Plane Society. Referring to the conversation again, they've provided a rather compelling description of both limitations and challenges of the design Hughes is using, the most significant of which is his reliance on roughly 370 liters of superheated water being used to propel the craft straight up. Using some equations that have been around since the 1800s, we can figure out that the rocket has a maximum height of 2 kilometers based on its weight, velocity, and overall capacity of its fuel. Based on this information and the deployment site, Mount Whitney, there is a possible maximum height to be reached of 6.5 kilometers. This is just shy of the necessary 10 kilometers to see the curvature of the Earth. Unfortunately, Hughes is so confident of success in deployment this time that he is seeking funding to go to the edge of space with his next launch. Space starts about 100 kilometers up into the air. This is where the atmosphere is so thin that you need to have specially designed craft to be able to work within it, and they need to be able to move at a very specific minimum speed in order to stay where they are. The conversation has also explored this particular ambition and found that his rocket would need to hold just under 30,000 liters of water to be able to achieve that result. Considering what has happened with Elon Musk's SpaceX program recently, the chances of that succeeding are slim, but at least they will not wind up in a fireball should there be a catastrophic failure. The final tidbit for today regards an improvement to the CRISPR gene editing methodologies. This enhancement has allowed multiple genes to be changed at the same time. This would be important for those who are examining complex pathologies that require multiple genes to be affected simultaneously. The major improvement in this method is to go away from the Cas9 enzyme and instead use the Cas12a enzyme. This has previously been shown to improve the efficacy and accuracy of CRISPR. There are some concerns about the off-target and unknown effects of being able to change multiple genes simultaneously. However, if it is effective and safe, it would be a far more powerful tool. Thank you for watching this video. If you have found it interesting, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Please post any comments, questions, or suggestions below.